Minnesota Wild are in town for what is always a fun night, the Thanksgiving Eve game. Gravy boats and all coming up here on the Locked On Sabres podcast.
Your Locked On Sabres, your daily podcast on the Buffalo Sabres. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome in, and thanks for making Locked On Sabres your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. You can check us out on our YouTube channel where you can watch the show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Start the season with a big return on FanDuel. New customers can place a $5 bet, and you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Sneaky Joe DiBiase on a Wednesday game day for the Sabres against the Minnesota Wild. They are back home. They have a lot of home games coming up. 6 of their next 7 are going to be at KeyBank Center, and a big opportunity for them to continue to climb in the standings and put some distance between themselves, who are still in a playoff spot 4 days after their last game, still in a playoff spot, and teams that are outside of the postseason. Put a gap between those two teams is going to be the goal for the next week or two here on the show and for the team. If you would like to become a part of our Locked On Sabres text club, reminder, you can always do that by heading over to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnSabres. Hit the subscribe button there, and then you get your texts from us. Today, you would have been getting all the updates on the Sabres line combinations, a little back and forth on the changes that they made from yesterday to today, when yesterday we thought Jack Quinn might be the healthy scratch, and today that does not appear to be the case. So there's a lot to get to on some changes that Lindy Ruff made at the morning skate on Wednesday morning. But this is in store to be potentially a great night. A great night. It is always one of the best nights to go to of the year. If you are somebody that splits season tickets with others and you draft or pick through what you want before the year, what games you want to go to, like, this is always going to be right at the top of the list, regardless of who they're playing. This game is always a sellout or close to. Energy in the building. And I know this is close to a sellout because the secondary market ticket, I had a buddy who wanted to go tonight, and it's like thinking, okay, it's the Sabres still, right? What are you trained for with the Sabres recently? I'm going to go on the secondary market, and tickets are going to be pretty cheap. You go on for tonight, and he's thinking, Minnesota, why are your tickets so expensive? Oh, okay. Thanksgiving Eve, right? Gravy boats. The first 10,000 fans tonight will get the Sabres Zamboni-themed gravy boats that you could then use on Thanksgiving tomorrow. But this is always a big night because it's the night before Thanksgiving. Everybody's going out the night after, and if you're going to the game, you could go right from the game to somewhere downtown, one of the local establishments right around. So I know a bunch of buddies that are doing that, and it's always a fun night. So only hoping that the Sabres can start off everybody's night with a big win to go to 4 wins in a row. It's not going to be their easiest challenge. This is a tough opponent that they are facing in the Minnesota Wild. So we got to talk about them, what they have in store for the Sabres. A lot to get to on today's show. We will kick things off, though, beginning with the big news that Tage said yesterday, and Lindy Ruff has officially confirmed today. Tage Thompson is officially returning to the lineup. He missed 16 days with his lower body injury. He has not played since Montreal a few weeks ago. He is back. He is on a goal streak. He scored in that Montreal game, and you're obviously hoping he could pick up right where he left off. And I think now that we're here at the game he's playing, I think you could look back on how they treated his injury and think, well, he's been practicing for 9 days. His first practice back was last Monday, before any of their West Coast games. Last Monday was his first practice back with the team. He has logged 5 practices since he got back on the ice. So, he's not getting rushed back. I think should feel pretty comfortable in thinking that Tage is 100%. I don't think they would have played it the way they did if he wasn't 100% or pretty close to it. So I'm expecting full Tage. I'm expecting not what we got last year when he returned from injury, which was a guy with a wrist injury that couldn't really shoot the puck. Not the guy that you had 2 years ago with the back injury where he really couldn't skate or move around the same way that you were accustomed to. I think you're getting full Tage. I am expecting him to look like the number one superstar center that he has looked like through the first quarter of this season so far. So, with Tage back in, though, we've talked about this. Like, what does that do to the lines? And the point that I've been making is, well, look at their center depth. Look at all the guys they have that could play center. Really, there are 6 names. And what I've been rooting for and what I told you that I would do is keep Jiri Kulich at center. That I know you're going to have to move some guys to the wing that you probably didn't plan on doing that with, but Kulich has earned staying at center. And yesterday, Kulich practiced on the wing with Ryan McLeod on the third line. Today, ahead of the Minnesota game, Kulich was back down the middle, and it appears he's going to stay down the middle for at least tonight's game. The line combinations, I love the line combinations for tonight's game, and I certainly like them a lot more than I did yesterday. The top line for tonight's game, Thompson, Tuch, Peterka, no big surprise there. Cousins will center Zach Benson and Peyton Krebs. They are leaving that line together. The juggling is really in the bottom 6 from yesterday. Kulich down the middle with Jason Zucker on his left and Jack Quinn remaining in the lineup on the right side. I like that line. Kulich, Zucker, and Quinn. Quinn, I thought, had his best weekend of the season on Friday and Saturday, especially Friday. I think Kulich has been very strong at center the last 3 games, and Zucker has been one of the most impressive Sabre forwards, one of the most consistent Sabre forwards all season. So you look at that middle 6, Cousins, Benson, Krebs, one line, Kulich, Quinn, Zucker, the other line. I would expect the Cousins line to be more responsible defensively and to be a more buttoned up line, but I think the Kulich line is more dangerous. I think there's more offensive pop on that third line right now than there is on that second line. And what that means then is that Ryan McLeod gets bumped down to 4th line center, which is, it's not even really his fault. Like, it's just kind of weird, right? That the last 3 games they won on this win streak, they won 3 games in a row out west while Ryan McLeod was their number 1 center. And then they return home and Ryan McLeod is their number 4 center. He went from 1 to 4, just like that. But it kind of fits, right? Like, and it doesn't even have to be a punishment for him. It kind of fits that, well, if Kulich is going to take over as a scoring center and look good doing it, then you have depth at the position. And you're going to want Kulich to be on a scoring line, so you bump McLeod down to more defensive line, and the only line left for him in that role is the 4th line, which he'll play tonight with Beck Malenstein and Sam Lafferty. So we'll see if that combination holds up and what they look like together. But I suddenly look at the Sabres lineup and think, all right, if Cousins can not be, terrible, then Thompson, Cousins, Kulich, and McLeod has some real potential to be a great 1 through 4 center group. And that's very different from how I was feeling about their center group at the beginning of the season. I was very worried about their center group, and I believe that's starting to turn around a little bit. And Kulich is really the culprit. Kulich is the one that is helping that along. That optimism, to me, is most of which coming through him. McLeod's been good, exceeded expectation, in my opinion. I think Thompson has been the superstar we were hoping he was going to be. Cousins has obviously fallen short of expectation, but it's mostly about Kulich being able to be an NHL player and do it down the middle. And he is the guy that I am locked in on for tonight's game. I am locked in on Jiri Kulich. In his 3 games at center, Kulich, looking at some of his numbers, had 7 scoring chances. He obviously had that goal in overtime against Anaheim to win it, but he had 7 scoring chances for the Buffalo Sabres. He had 6 high danger chances for the Buffalo Sabres. He had a 58.7% expected goals for rate at 5-on-5, which was the 2nd best mark of any player on the Sabres during their West Coast trip. And I've talked about how good he was on faceoffs. 68.5%. He won 24 of 35 faceoffs in the last 3 games. So Jiri Kulich has been really strong. He's not quite putting up the offensive totals yet. He only has that 1 goal, 3-on-3 in overtime. But I think the way he played in the last 3 games, I would expect the goals to start pouring in, or the points at least to start coming. I thought he looked good doing it, and I think that you're going to see some results coming up with Jiri Kulich down the middle. Blue line remains the same, and then Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen is going to be your goaltender for tonight's game. So feeling good about the Sabres lineup. They're pretty healthy, right? How many do they have? They're only missing Jordan Greenway. That's it, and we're still waiting on how long he'll be out, but that's a good sign, right? Like you're a month and a half through the season, and they got through that Tage injury with 3 wins, and that's it. You're just waiting on Greenway, and everybody else is good to go. So Luukkonen in goal obviously makes a big difference, and the Sabres will put that lineup out in the ice against the Minnesota Wild tonight. When we come back, we will talk about the opponent. And for a moment, I want to talk about the history between these two teams because the Sabres and the Wild have a weird history. And I'll explain why, and then we'll get to what's going on with them this year because they have a great record and they've got they got their superstar back. Kirill Kaprizov is back in the lineup. He played last game. So that's where we'll start things off, and then we'll tell you about the rest of it. Coming up here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Sabres is presented by Built. PSA for anybody who rents. If you haven't heard of Built, you're about to thank me. Earning points on rent is now a reality when you pay your rent through Built. You don't even have to check with your landlord to start earning points that you can use towards flights, hotel stays, fitness classes, even your next rent payment if you want. So let me break it down to you. There's no cost to join Built. As a member, you'll earn valuable points on rent and on your everyday spending. Built points can be transferred to your favorite hotels and airlines, and even the ones you haven't heard of. There are over 500 airlines and 700,000 hotels and properties around the world you can redeem your Built points towards. Points can also be redeemed towards a future rent payment, unique experience that only Built members can access. So if you're not earning points on rent, my question would be, why not? Start earning points on rent you're already paying by going to joinbuilt.com/lockedonnhl. That's joinbuilt.com/lockedonnhl. joinbilt.com/lockedonnhl. Make sure use our URL so they know we sent you. joinbuilt.com/lockedonnhl. Start earning points on your rent payments today. Today's episode of the Locked On Sabres podcast is also presented by Gametime. So I talked about for tonight's game, Buffalo and Minnesota, how tickets are kind of a hot commodity. Everybody wants to go to this game. It's a Thanksgiving Eve. You got a giveaway, and you've got a team that's on a win streak. And if you are looking for a last-minute opportunity to go to this game and you don't want to spend a fortune, the best chance you're going to have, the best way to do that is to check it all out on the Gametime app. Gametime has this new feature called Gametime Picks. It makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier because Gametime Picks is going to filter out all the fluff. They're only going to show you the great, incredible deals on the best seats and, wherever you want to sit. So you don't have to waste time searching through thousands and thousands of tickets. And it's not just that. You get a panoramic view from your seats. You know exactly what you're going to buy and you know what you're going to get when you get there. They have their lowest price guarantee. Find a ticket for less. Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. And their ticket coverage. Your purchase covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. It's absolutely quick. I went to a game a few weeks ago, went right up to the arena. I walked up to the arena without a ticket. And as I'm standing there in the plaza, I bought my ticket, I walked right inside, and I got right in. So super fast and painless. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Game time. Back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast, Sabres and Wild on a Wednesday night. Next up for the Sabres will be Friday at 3 o'clock against Vancouver. A couple of Western Conference teams in a row here. Tonight, Minnesota. And the Sabres and the Wild had some good games. There was that game 2 years ago black and red games. Sabres scored a bunch of goals. Victor Olofsson, I think, scored in overtime. Cousins scored an amazing goal, really high-scoring affair. They've had some good, entertaining games against Minnesota. To me, when I think of Minnesota, though, I think of two things about the Wild that are interesting. One, not Sabres related, is just how they have the same season every single year. The Minnesota Wild, since the Sabres last made the playoffs, have lost in the opening round of the NHL playoffs 8 times. Not just made the playoffs 8 times, they've made the playoffs 10 times. They have they've exited the playoffs in round 1 8 times. It's the same season every year. They've missed the playoffs twice. They've got to the second round twice, and then every other year they lose in the first round. It's pretty incredible how they just have the same season every year. And the reason that they're connected in my mind is how often these two teams trade with each other. During the Sabres playoff drought, the Sabres and the Wild have traded with each other 6 times. Now, that is only exceeded by Montreal. I looked this up. The only team the Sabres have traded with more in the last 14 years are the Montreal Canadiens, interestingly, in their own division. They've traded 7 times. But a bunch of those Montreal trades are like pick swap trades or this AHL guy for future considerations. Like, there aren't really any big trades between the Sabres and Montreal. Minnesota, like, it's a lot of player for player trades. It's a buyer's trade at the deadline. Like, they're real trades that are happening between these two teams. So when you look at the history of that, you might have forgotten about some of these. If we start way back, the first of which of these deals would have been when the Sabres sent Jason Pominville 11 years ago out of the drought. Starting off in the drought, starting the rebuild, they traded Pominville to Minnesota. They got Matt Hackett, Johan Larsson, a first-round pick, and a second-round pick. So they got a bunch of stuff back in return. None of it really became anything crazy, but they got a lot of stuff. Pominville goes to Minnesota. The next season, the Sabres are tanking, and they trade Matt Molson and Cody McCormick in a deadline deal to Minnesota for Torrey Mitchell, a second, 2 second-round picks. One of those seconds became Josh George's, by the way, if you care. And then Molson, by the way, did that thing where he left in a trade and then he came back the next year, which, looking back in hindsight, probably wish he didn't. That was another big trade that these two teams made. Then you fast forward to the next year, and the Sabres are tanking again. And this time, Chris Stewart. Remember Chris Stewart on the Sabres? They sent him to Minnesota, and they got a second-round pick. That's going to be the best result of any of these trades, by the way, because the Sabres on March 2nd, 2015, sent Chris Stewart to Minnesota for a second-round pick. Who did that second-round pick become? Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen. Think you won that trade, and you're still going to get the payoff even tonight. So there's that. I wonder if that'll come up. It probably won't, because I don't know how many people even know that. I was surprised to learn it today, that they got Luukkonen from a deadline deal for Chris Stewart, who was just kind of like a low-level rental guy. They weren't done there. Remember, there were a lot of big trades between these two teams. In 2017, the Sabres and the Wild decide, let's do it again. This time, Tyler Ennis and Marcus Foligno go to Minnesota. Jason Pominville comes back along with Marco Scandella. I don't know who won that trade. You got Pominville back. Pominville might have been, well, for 2 years he was pretty good. Foligno, though, is still doing pretty well in Minnesota. So I would probably say they won that deal because Foligno's still going there. And then one more, actually 2 more. Sorry. There's so many trades between these two teams. A forgotten deal that is my least favorite trade in Sabre history because it's gross and it brought a player to the Buffalo Sabres that I really, truly wish never played for the Buffalo Sabres. The Sabres traded on September 16th, 2020. This is one of Kevin Adams' first trades as a general manager. Marcus Johansson to Minnesota for Eric Staal. Eric Staal is a Buffalo Sabre. Should have never happened. I wish it never happened. It did. Hate that trade. And then finally, the Sabres and the Wild, sort of been 2 years ago, trade a second-round pick and a fifth-round pick to Minnesota to get Jordan Greenway. So Jordan Greenway, the most recent of these deals. I mean, that's a lot, right? I just took up 4 minutes to show there because we just so much history between these two teams in the trade market in the last, decade, really. Like, it's all recent. So That's the history between the two teams. Let's get to the team this year, though, what Minnesota is going to be putting out there on the ice. They're going to be putting out a team that is right there at the top of the standings. They are 30 points already on the year, 13, 4, and 4. They're only really behind Winnipeg. And Winnipeg's having a historically great start to the year. If Winnipeg wasn't having the start they were, Minnesota would be one of the storylines of the league so far. But they're not, because the Jets have just been so historically good so far. But you are seeing Kirill Kaprizov, just continue to assert himself as one of the best offensive players in the league. 34 points in 20 games so far this year. He is so dynamic. He is so good. He's such a good shooter. He's a good playmaker. He is such a great, well-rounded offensive player. He is absolutely their best player and their superstar. Matt Boldy has turned into a very consistent goal scorer in the NHL, and he's right there again with 11 goals in 21 games. It's a 40-goal pace. And then Marco Rossi. Remember Marco Rossi? We debated him versus Jack Quinn in the NHL draft a couple of years ago, and then Rossi had that illness, and it knocked him out for a couple of years, and he just started getting his feet wet again last year. Well, this year he's off to a great start. 17 points in 21 games. He's playing 17 minutes a night, so kind of a second-line role, center role for Marco Rossi. And if you care about that debate, I don't really think you should. It's so far past it. Jack Quinn versus Marco Rossi. Right now, probably advantage Marco Rossi because he's looked very good this year. And Jack Quinn, of course, has yet to be the goaltender on the season. So some of the big names for Minnesota on the year that you're looking at there. The line combos for this team, line one is their best line by far. It's a big gap, I think, between number one and number two. Joel Eriksson centering Matt Boldy and Kirill Kaprizov is a great line. I mentioned Marcus Johansson a moment ago. He's back there. That guy's back in Minnesota. He's still hanging around in the league. If you're surprised to see him tonight, he's on the wing with Marco Rossi and Ryan Hartman. You got Freddie Gaudreau and Marcus Foligno with Yakov Trenin on the third line. The fourth line is honestly three guys that I don't know much about: Ben Jones, Devin Shore, and Jacob Loco. And then on the blue line, the guy to keep an eye on there is Brock Faber. Brock Faber was very good last year in his first season in the NHL. And I really am wondering how much potential there is for him to be like a star defenseman in the league. This year, he's off to a pretty good start. He's played 25 minutes a night, which is a big load for him. Last year, by the way, he's finished second in the Calder. So, not just was last year a good year for him, second in Calder voting. And I believe he made the all-star team too. No, all-rookie team. This year, 12 points in 21 games. He is, to me, their best defenseman. If you go down to the depths of their blue line, old friend Zach Bogosian is still hanging around in Minnesota. So keep an eye on him tonight. Somebody the Sabres could definitely take advantage of because he is a defenseman very prone to make mistakes for his entire career. And then you're going to get Philip Gustafsson in goal tonight for Minnesota. And Gustafsson is a very good quality starting goalie in the NHL. I know that in part because he is my fantasy goaltender on the year. Gustafsson on the year, a .923 save percentage, 9-4-3 is the record. Some of his recent games, though, he has allowed 3 goals in back-to-back games. So maybe you hope you can get at least 3 on him in this one. When we come back to wrap things up, I got my parlay of the day, and we'll take a look at the odds. The Sabres, a home underdog, if you're confident in this team and the win streak and the lineup tonight. And we'll get to that when we come back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. This episode of Locked On Sabres presented by FanDuel. We're going to get to my parlay, talk some betting in a moment, and all those odds are going to be courtesy of FanDuel Sportsbook. But it's not just tonight's game or hockey in general, but football. Get ready to tackle the NFL action for the remainder of the season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. You can check all that out at FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the National Football League. Final segment here on the Locked On Sabres podcast, the Sabres and the Wild tonight at 7. Again, the first 10,000 fans get the Buffalo Sabres gravy boat. Let me throw that gravy boat up for our YouTube watchers. If you would like to check it out, what it looks like. And here you go. It might be tougher than I thought to pull that up last second. But anyways, let's get to some betting on tonight's game. The Sabres are underdogs in this game to Minnesota, which I don't think is that big of a surprise. But I wanted to bring this up when talking about the Wild. I'll get to it here, though. I want to save it for the betting, actually. Minnesota, expected goals for percentage. Where do they rank on the season? The record's top 3, right? Or second. Where do they rank expected goals for percentage? 16th on the year. Where do they rank in shot share? Shot attempts on the season? Minnesota ranks 23rd in that department. Okay. Not as impressive as you might think. What about in the percentage of scoring chances that they get versus their opponent? 22nd on the year. Not so great in that department either. But where do they rank in shooting percentage and where do they rank in save percentage? Which, again, it's not to say, I always want to make this point. Whenever I bring that up as like luck stats, I know it's not total luck. Like some teams are better at scoring than others and finishing their chances. But it's more of a rule of thumb. And in most cases, like I know not all cases, but in most cases, the stats that are harder to hold up over the course of a whole season are your shot percentage and your save percentage, which is why if I see a really high number in both of those departments, I typically am going to bet on regression. It's not always going to happen that way. Sometimes it can hold up for a whole year, but more times than not, it is going to regress a bit. And this year on the season, the Wild shooting percentage in the NHL ranks 7th and save percentage ranks 2nd. So that's where they're really getting production, and I just question whether you could do that for a full 82-game slate. But they're doing it now. Which is why they're favored. Minus 137 on the money line. Sabres are plus 114. But those numbers I just read off to you is why I like the Sabres with the puck line tonight. So to lose by 1 or to win the game. So you do have to go minus 200 on that for my first leg of the parlay, but I like that. The over-under, by the way, I'm not touching the over-under for tonight's game. It's set at 5.5 goals, minus 120 on the over, minus 102 on the under. I am not going near that side of the bet. My sneaky parlay for tonight's game, I am going with the Sabres plus 1.5 goals. So again, to lose by 1 or win the game. That's not great odds on that, but I like that as just kind of a give me one of these legs with a win and let me get lucky on the other two. The other two, Dylan Cousins to record 3+ shots on goal. Cousins on his line, I think, is the shooter because Benson is more of a playmaker and the two-way guy right now, and Krebs is more of an energy guy, and same thing with him. I think he's more of a pass-first mentality typically. Cousins, I think, is the shooter of the line. And if you look at some of his more recent games, he had 8 shots on goal against San Jose, but he didn't have any against Anaheim and LA. So take that for what it's worth. He had 8 on the trip. I'm going 3+. He had 8 in San Jose when he was with these two line mates. That's why I like this, because when he played with Krebs and when he played with Benson, he had 8 shots on goal. And for this, I only need him to get 3+. And then finally, I'm going to make this a long shot bet with my anytime goal guy. We talked about Jiri Kulich earlier in the show. I am going with Jiri Kulich to score a goal. That's plus 550. And that's why I don't think his odds should be that long. I think they should be higher up. He's going to get some power play opportunities on that second unit. He is going to be playing on an offensive line with Jason Zucker and Jack Quinn. I could very well see them getting the second most ice time in this game in front of the Cousins line. I've been impressed by Kulich. I think he's knocking on the door. I really think he's knocking on the door to scoring some goals, and I'm going to bet it now while his odds are lower. And his odds are lower than Ryan McLeod, Jack Quinn, Zach Benson, Dylan Cousins, Jason Zucker, JJ Peterka, Alex Tuch, Tage Thompson. Like, of course, some of those guys he should be below. Not all of those guys. He should not be below McLeod, in my opinion, who is on the fourth line for this game, a more defensive line. He should not be below Zach Benson, in my opinion. I don't think he should be below Jack Quinn, and I don't even believe he should be below maybe Jason Zucker. He should be below. But that should be closer. Zucker's plus 310, and Kulich is plus 550. The gap should not be that large between those two players. So Kulich, anytime goal, plus 550. All three of those together makes this a pretty long shot parlay. Like, we're not likely to cash on this one, but you're going to get a big payout if it does. Plus 1542. So 10 to win 154 or 100 to win 1500 if you're keeping track at home. That's my sneaky parlay for tonight's game. Should be a good one. Go get those gravy boats. Get there early. And that's going to do it for today's episode of the Locked On Sabres podcast. If you would like to check out one of our sister shows and you got your fantasy hockey team and you're trying to figure out who to play, check out Steal and Flip on Locked On Fantasy Hockey. Or if you want to listen to some Bills talk ahead of Bills and Niners on Sunday, Joe Marino's got you covered on Locked On Bills. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you tomorrow here on the Locked On Sabres podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.